Hello, I am Andy,
Hello, I'm Richard.
and this is Strange Stuff Murdery Bits. And it's been a whole week since we were here last time. Anything exciting happened in your life?
I took my daughter to her first ever gig.
Oh, how did that go?
She loved it. We went to see the Meteors.
Ah, that's one that's escaped me.
Yeah, and I'd never seen them before, so it was an opportunity for me to finally see them. And chance for her to go and see her first live gig. Because I
She
felt
enjoyed it?
yeah, she had a marvelous time. Yeah, absolutely loved it. But I felt it was important that her first gig should be in a venue, not in a bloody field or a stadium. Because,
I'm
that's
not a fan of stadiums.
no, I fucking hate them. Big, impersonal, horrible things where you're miles away from the band watching it on a big screen, so you may as well just stay at home and watch a video on telly.
Exactly.
And as for bands in fields, no. I have always said that it's bands in venues, cows in fields.
Although, having said that, most of the bands I saw in fields, I had VIP passes, so I was basically in a tent, which was a bar. Didn't see a band.
No, you went to the Flar year after year.
They,
You never saw a band.
I know. I mean, I've seen some of the best bands in the world I've missed by being in the VIP area. I mean, In Excess, David Bowie, fucking Rolling Stones even. I mean, it's just like I've missed them all, but I was there. I don't regret a minute of it.
Yeah.
Except maybe David Bowie. I would have loved to have watched him play Space Oddity live because it was the song that really awakened my musical interest.
Right.
But the pull of the JD and Coke was just too strong.
Terrible, isn't it?
I know. Anyway, that's life.
The trouble is, that's what happens when you know all the crew and all the sound engineers, and you end up getting treated more like staff than you are a punter, and so you just end up in places that,
Well, sometimes you end up getting treated more like a star than the actual stars.
Well, there's that as well. But yeah, now the amount of times, I mean, I saw a few bands. I actually stopped doing it from side of stage, but it's just kind of rubbish. I'd be like, oh, come on, just go backstage. It's like, nah, thank you very much. I shall go down to the pit and see the band as they were meant to be seen. Oh, Satan's claws.
She's piercing nipples again.
Actually, that was one of your favourites, the Flar, wasn't it? You always ended up with something pierced.
Yes, usually in the lower nether regions. Still there, still rust-free.
Okay, fair enough.
That was always fun.
Don't know what happened to the Flar.
I think it's still going on.
Was it?
But yeah, but it's been taken over a bit, the same as all of them. It's gone a bit corporate.
Funny enough, talking of the Flar, Vince Powers died the other day.
No.
Yeah, 79.
Oh no, he was actually probably the only decent one left out of all the promoters.
Oh God, yeah, they've all become absolute corporate scum.
Yeah.
Metropolis and all the likes of them, and then obviously Clear Channel ruined it. They were the ones that came along, bought everything, and they ruined music. Full stop. They destroyed local radio stations in America. They bought them all up because it was cheaper than paying to advertise on the radio stations, and they just homogenised them all.
Yes, better to open a McDonald's than individual restaurants.
Absolutely not. But that is the thinking, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then they did it over here. They bought out Mean Fiddler. Vince Powers sold it to them. And all they wanted was the festivals because they got the venues as well. They didn't give a shit about them. So let the venues go to rack and ruin.
Yeah.
Focused on the festivals. But I'm not even sure if they still own all the festivals anymore. Clear Channel, I don't know who owns them there.
Oh well. Yeah. Anyway, to business.
So who killed who this week?
The very reason. Now look, there is a trigger warning I should set out today. There will be giggling.
Okay. Inappropriate giggling, then.
I don't like giggling when we're talking about murdery bits, but it's going to be unavoidable in this particular story. So
Fair
just
enough.
so you know,
That's-
we do respect the people who were the victims here, but there are certain things leading up to the crimes being committed in this episode that are, quite frankly, fucking hilarious.
Good. I kind of like my psycho murders with a bit of giggling.
The chap we're talking about is a chap called Jerome Henry Brudos.
Right, never heard of him.
And no, you wouldn't have. He's escaped me quite well over the years. He was born in Webster in South Dakota on January the 31st, 1939. The year war broke out. Second World War, clearly.
Thank you for that, yeah.
Yeah. He was the youngest of two sons, born to Marie Eileen and Henry Irvin Brudos. Now, his mother had wanted her second child to be a daughter, a girl. And she was very displeased when she gave birth to yet another son. She would frequently, emotionally and physically abuse and belittle her younger son, making absolutely no secret of the fact to him that she'd wanted a daughter as opposed to another boy. By contrast, she doted on the older boy, Larry.
That's nice of her.
I mean, what a cunt.
Yeah.
Frankly.
Mm-hmm.
You get what you're given.
Yeah, but and it's not unusual. My mother always used to tell me and my brother that she never wanted boys. She only wanted girls.
Yeah, but, you just make do, don't you?
Well, yeah.
I never wanted to be born poor.
How dare your parents?
Yeah, I know. I've never forgiven them. Anyway, the family lived in a modest and pious sort of lifestyle. And this is, whenever I hear the word pious, I picture like a little wooden shack on a hilltop with shutters with the cross carved out of the wooden shutter.
Yeah.
And a whip and a paddle above the door.
Yeah, it sounds about right.
The father typically held casual and often seasonal employment, and the mother was a homemaker. Although Henry was a short-tempered individual, he was very seldom physically abusive towards or even emotionally critical of his children, whereas Marie was a harsh, matriarchal and prudish individual who reserved the majority of her denigration for the younger son.
Lovely.
As a direct result of his lacking maternal acceptance as a young child, he formed quite a close relationship with a neighbouring woman of a similar age to his mother. And this individual was both compassionate towards him and accepting of him throughout his visits. And Brudos later confessed to occasionally fantasizing that she was his true mother. However, she suffered from diabetes, and her declining health forced her to cease permitting visits from him or any other neighbourhood children. And shortly thereafter, a female childhood friend the same age as Henry died of tuberculosis, leaving Brudos inconsolable.
Doesn't sound like a pleasant childhood.
No, but pretty much typical in the 30s and 40s, I would have thought.
Yeah. But not unusual, certainly.
No. He was an unremarkable and sickly child, was Jerome, with few friends, and he frequently complained of throat pains and migraines. He typically achieved average grades, as opposed to his academically achieving and popular brother. At high school, he remained unremarkable.
His brother was a successful
Oh,
then as well.
he was
to his misery.
He was a straight A jock.
See, just, you don't
hate
need
them.
those people in your family.
No, unless it's you, of course.
Well,
Then
indeed,
then you can piss on the weak one. At high school, he remained unremarkable to both his peers and his teachers. He very seldom engaged in any extracurricular activities, although he was known to have been the secretary-treasurer of a youth club in his early teens.
Okay.
Now, largely due to his father's seasonal work, the family frequently moved, typically around the Pacific Northwest. And throughout Brudos's childhood, he moved around basically every year before permanently settling in Salem, Oregon. And
Nice.
this
Oh,
property
this is
was
not the same Salem,
not.
is it?
This is not the Salem.
No. It's the other side of the country.
Yeah, this property was also located upon farmland. Now, Jerome harbored a lifelong shoe and foot fetish.
Okay.
He later recollected his fascination for women's shoes and feet sourced from an incident when he, aged approximately 5, observed the teenage daughter of a family friend lying asleep on his bed, having been allowed to by his parents after she complained of feeling unwell. According to Brudos, he was transfixed by the sight of the girl's high-heeled shoes, and he attempted to pry them off her feet. The girl awoke and simply told him to leave the room. On another occasion, at age 5, Brudos discovered a pair of leather high-heeled shoes with a rhinestone-studded clasp while exploring a local junkyard, and he took these shoes home. He then slipped them onto his feet to show his mum.
Okay.
In response, his mother shrieked he was wicked and ordered him to remove the shoes and return them to the junkyard.
Ah, I thought for a minute you were going to say that she simply went and bought him a nice little dress.
Well, upon learning her son had secretly retained the footwear and frequently secretly wore them, his mother severely beat him before burning the shoes in his presence.
Nice person.
Now, 2 years after this incident, he's 7 now, Jerome attempted to steal the high-heeled shoes of his first grade teacher.
Off her feet.
She'd never notice. I mean, it's a perfect crime. I know we shouldn't giggle, but faces of acquaintances flash through my head every time I talk about feet and shoes.
I did read a theory years ago. Psychologists reckoned that boys who ended up with feet and shoe fetishes were often not picked up very much. Parents who didn't spend time low on the ground with them. So when they were babies,
I guess
around, all they saw of their mother was literally feet and shoes.
Yeah, it's like Tom and Jerry.
Yes. Yeah.
I guess you think mum is a pair of shoes.
Yeah, absolutely.
I never thought of it like that before. Yes.
Yeah, I don't know how much credence there is in it, but it makes sense.
Oh, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's it. It's a fact.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, when he was caught, he confessed to his actions because he was caught.
Mm-hmm.
But when asked why,
under the desk, pulling her shoes off,
with his tongue firmly ensconced inside a size 18 stiletto, he claimed not to know why he'd attempted to steal the footwear.
Well, at 7, I don't imagine he did.
No, it was just something that his groin told him he needed to do.
Yeah.
Anyway, by the onset of puberty, he'd also developed a fetish for women's underwear and lingerie.
Yeah, it kind of follows, doesn't it?
According to
As you work
Brudos,
your way up the legs.
Yeah.
As you got taller.
Yeah, I guess. According to Brudos, he was introduced to the practice of viewing, fondling, and smelling female underwear by a neighborhood boy with several older sisters. And with whom he...
It's going to be an extra long podcast, clearly.
Even Satan's left the area, disgusted with us. Grow up. Fuck's sake. Okay. So him and his mate would occasionally sneak into the girls' bedrooms to perform these acts, which invoked deep erotic feelings in him, which he initially failed to understand, because I'm guessing he was like 8.
Yeah.
As a teenager, he would steal underwear from female neighbours upon moments of opportunism, some of which he would later wear.
When I was a kid, I grew up in a small village in Wales when I was young, and there was a big hoo-ha because knickers were going missing off washing lines. And police were called in, investigation. It eventually turned out to be the guy that was in charge of the local forestry commission. They found bags of these panties in the woods.
Well, I mean,
but the thing that got me was this is like, I don't know, early 80s, and you're talking about old Welsh women and bloomers, not lacy panties, but massive, horrible bloomers.
I mean, we're talking about 1947 here. I mean, what kind of lingerie was available in those days?
Well, it was either bloomers or, I suppose, French knickers. That was about it in those days. No lycra, no elastic as such.
No lace.
Probably even knitted from wool.
Yes. Anyway, by the onset of puberty, Jerome still hadn't learned of the act of sexual intercourse, although he had become obsessed with viewing a naked female friend. However, he was markedly shy around the girls in his neighbourhood and at school. Plus, his height and quite severe acne further decreased his confidence in his ability to appeal to them. So by approximately...
Not having a good life, this kid, is he?
It's a poor start.
Yeah.
I mean, he might be a late bloomer.
Well,
I don't know.
I'm sure we'll find out, but he's not having a good time yet.
By approximately 1953, so he's 14 at this stage,
Yeah.
Still oblivious to the act of intercourse, he had begun to masturbate. He later claimed to fail to ejaculate during the act of masturbation as a teenager, although he frequently experienced wet dreams. And whenever his mother discovered semen stains on the bedsheet, he was punished and forced to wash his own sheets. Now, Jerome began stalking women in his early teens, several of whom he discreetly photographed. He also stole and retained numerous items of lingerie and footwear. However, none of these initial offences were violent in nature, although by his mid-teens he had begun developing violent fantasies of forcibly possessing a woman. Although what to do with her when he had her, he still had no idea.
He didn't have a clue, no.
At the age of 16, Jerome dug an underground tunnel and alcove close to his family home. And this alcove was created to symbolically enact the developing fantasies within his mind regarding captive women. And he spent numerous hours within his lair at age 16, mentally hoping to entrap a captive. I don't know what he was using for bait. I mean, it could have been a trail of underwears and shoes.
A goat is traditional, I believe.
Although no women Although no women were confined at this location, Brudos did lure a neighbourhood girl to his bedroom to facilitate his sexual fantasies at age 16, and almost immediately upon luring her to his bedroom, upon innocuous purposes, Jerome exited the bedroom only to reappear minutes later wearing a mask and brandishing a knife. He forced the girl to strip naked before proceeding to take several photographs of her and then fleeing. Now, minutes later, Jerome would reappear wearing his original shirt with his hair in disarray and a minor scuff mark on his cheek, claiming an intruder had locked him in the family barn at knife point.
Okay.
So his thing was that it wasn't him with the mask and the knife.
I can't see this working.
I mean, it's a stretch, Jerome.
I just don't see this working.
But I mean, aside from the photographs, the girl was unharmed.
Right. Did he have a dark room? Because you can't exactly at this point in time wander into your local chemist in a small American town and go, here you go, develop these for me, please.
It depends on the person working there, I would say.
Suppose, yeah.
There's a chance that the chap working behind the counter would definitely develop your photos as long as he could get a copy.
Well, there is that, yes.
Now, within a year of this first known violent offence, Jerome had established a pattern of abducting girls his own age or younger, typically at knife point, and forcing them into a barn upon his family farm before ordering them to disrobe before photographing them. He would then lock these girls in a corn crib before reappearing several minutes later, wearing different clothing and with his hair combed in a different fashion. He would then release the girls, claiming that he was Ed, Jerry's twin brother.
Okay. Yeah. These girls, though, I mean, it's a barn in so rural.
And so they know him.
They know him, but was he marching them like 4 miles at knife point to this barn? Or, or do they all loiter around his farm waiting?
I don't know. And like, you would imagine that they knew he wasn't a twin.
Yeah.
But anyway, he would feign shock when the girls asked him, what the fuck are you doing? And then he'd say, he didn't hurt you, did he? He would claim that his twin was in therapy and this is going to set him back a bit if you inform anyone of your ordeal. So he would make them promise, or he would promise to locate and destroy the camera that Jerry had used. And none of them were subject to any physical sexual assaults beyond a little bit of tentative fondling. And all of them apparently agreed to keep it stum, as none of them are known to have informed the authorities about what went on.
Okay.
So although it's absolutely unbelievable and ridiculous that he's trying to get them to believe this fantasy, it sort of seemed to have worked.
Somehow or other. Yeah, maybe they just felt that if they went home and told their parents it was so ridiculous they wouldn't be believed.
I don't want to make jokes. I can't. On one occasion in April 1956, Jerome persuaded a 17-year-old girl to accompany him on a date. And upon driving the girl to a deserted road, he ordered her to undress, which she refused, whereupon he dragged her from the car and proceeded to beat her, breaking her nose, so he's escalating.
Yeah, big time.
The girl's screams and the general altercation attracted the attention of a young couple driving by who stopped and intervened. Jerome lamely claimed that the girl had fallen from the car before changing his story to claim that the hysterical girl had been attacked by some weirdo that he had overpowered. His story wasn't believed, and the couple drove the two of them to the nearest police station, where Jerome admitted to attacking the girl, but claimed that his intention had been to simply intimidate her into removing her clothes in order that he could photograph her. He denied ever having committed any previous acts of this nature and insisted that his temper had simply got the better of him.
Yeah, so, at this point, you can see the police might buy that.
Anyway, yeah, especially in the 50s.
Yeah.
Oh, boys will be boys.
Yeah, with no previous, so.
Yeah. Arrested on charges of assault and battery, a subsequent search of his bedroom revealed his extensive collection of female clothing, plus numerous Polaroid photos of teenage girls, one of whom...
Polaroid camera. Did they exist?
Yeah, I didn't see one until the 70s.
No, I didn't think the Instamatic Polaroids existed back in the 50s. Anyway.
One of these pictures, they were able to identify the girl, and she was contacted, and she revealed her ordeal at the hands of Jerry's twin brother the previous August. So Jerome was remanded in custody and later referred to the Polk County Juvenile Department. He was treated as a juvenile offender, and he was sent to undergo psychiatric evaluations within the Oregon State Hospital. He entered this facility on April 16, 1956, where he remained for 9 months, while permitted to leave the facility to attend high school. And while there, he was subjected to a range of evaluations, and these tests concluded that he was a depressive individual who suffered from a schizotypical personality disorder, but was not grossly mentally ill or suffering from delusions. Furthermore, the doctors at this facility concluded that his sexual fantasies revolved around the hatred he harboured towards his mother and women in general.
That's not too hard to work that one out, is it?
No, especially where the mother is concerned.
Yeah, no, it's just projected onto other women, but it's all his mother. Clearly, nice person that she was.
Yeah. Well, upon completion of his evaluations, he returned to live with his parents. And as an average scholar, he graduated 142nd out of a class of 202 students from Corvallis High School in 1957. 2 years later, he joined the Army, where he trained as a communications technician. And although he became highly skilled in this profession, his military service was largely unremarkable, and he gained a reputation amongst his fellow soldiers as something of a fantasist who repeatedly claimed to be in a casual sexual relationship with a beautiful Korean girl who, he claimed, sneaked into his bed every evening on the army base.
In the barracks.
Yes, past the guards.
Along with all the other men asleep in their bunk beds in the barracks.
I think they were possibly at war with the Koreans at this point. But I mean, you know, this is Jerome.
What year was this?
This was 58.
Yeah, Korean War finished in 56.
Oh, maybe she was a POW.
Possibly, who knows? But I think he's just probably making her up.
You think? Or maybe it was a friend of his brother's, the twin. Jerome was discharged from the army in October 59, having been classified as psychologically unfit for military service. And he moved back to his parents' house once more in Corvallis, Oregon. And he soon found employment at a local radio station as an electrical engineer. To his colleagues, he was an eminent, proficient and conscientious employee who conveyed a mild-mannered demeanour, yet seemed to lack any ambition to advance himself, despite being a licensed broadcast technician. So he was basically quite happy working in local radio when he could have possibly gone on to the heights of the BBC.
It doesn't sound like he was obsessed with achieving, though. I mean, 142nd out of 212 in school, very average. So,
I mean, you couldn't get more median.
No.
On one occasion, around 1960, Jerome observed a young woman wearing revealing clothing. Bear in mind, this would be the birth of the miniskirt era.
Mm-hmm.
He discreetly followed this woman to her Salem apartment, where he strangled her into a semi-conscious state before fleeing with her shoes.
Another huge escalation.
I want to stress that this woman was not raped.
No, good. But it sounds like it would be a lot easier if you just went and shoplifted from
I mean,
cars, you know?
he's got a job. Just go and buy them.
Yeah, now there's clearly a hatred thing here, isn't there? It's escalating big time. So, although, you know, he'd probably do himself a favour and just go murder his mother and get it over and done with.
Yeah. Shortly thereafter, Jerome observed another attractive young woman wearing high-heeled shoes. He attempted to overpower and strangle this woman, but this individual fought back, and Jerome fled the scene with only one of her shoes.
Because she was hitting him with the other one, I imagine.
Yeah, and they are weapons. Stiletto heels are actually dangerous weapons.
I saw a fight between two drag queens.
There's blood.
And they were just having at it with these stilettos, battering the shit out of each other. Yeah, cuts everywhere.
I mean, if you get a stiletto heel anywhere on your skull, you are going to drip blood.
Oh, yeah.
I know this because when we lived in East London, when I was about 6 or 7, there was a girl who attacked me and both my brothers with a high-heeled shoe. There was blood on both my brothers, but I was damn fast.
What did your brothers do to enrage this?
Do you know what? It wasn't hard to enrage this girl. She was not all there.
Right.
She was a couple of years older than us. And I don't know. I mean, we were just playing football or whatever we were doing outside the block of flats that we lived in. She lived in the same block. Probably a problem family. Mm. Anyway, she attacked us, and
yeah. And your brothers bear the scar to this day.
They do, and I'm just. That's why I have never been a foot fetishist. I'm guessing. Fucking hell, I'm not having any of that nonsense, mate. He retained this shoe, and in fact, the shoes of both the women in his shed, frequently sleeping with the attire. He wasn't arrested for either of those assaults. Right. Approximately a year after gaining employment at the radio station, he became acquainted with a 17-year-old girl named Ralphine Schwinier.
That's a hell of a name.
And he became acquainted with her via a teenage boy who, being an amateur electronics enthusiast, frequently visited the radio station to observe and question Brudos as to aspects of his work, and who had jokingly remarked about his shyness around female employees. According to Jerome, he had jokingly remarked to the youth to find him a girlfriend, and to his surprise, the teenager agreed and took him to Schwinier's home.
Okay, so there's a pimp in the making here as well then.
Yeah, I mean, this town's got everything.
Yeah.
So on September 30th, 1961, Jerome and Schwinier, 1 month pregnant at the time, married. And they initially resided in Portland, Oregon, before relocating to a small house in a suburb of Salem in the summer of 1968. The marriage ultimately produced 2 kids, a daughter, Teresa, born in 62, and a son, Brian, born in 67. And to supplement the family income, Jerome occasionally repaired vehicles in the family garage. And now, he was never physically or emotionally abusive towards his wife, although in the early years of their marriage, he did insist that she frequently walk around the house and perform housework naked, save for a pair of high-heeled shoes. Okay. I'm guessing he's not the only one in the world who does that.
No, I'm sure if you go on the internet and look that up, you'll find plenty of it.
I think you'll find that's actually a legitimate career.
Quite possibly.
Often he would photograph her doing this before engaging in intercourse. And for several years, his wife was quite happy with these proclivities, and Jerome is not known to have committed any sexual offences at all during the early years of his marriage. So he was just really looking for a soulmate at this stage. By the 1960s, middle 1960s, Teresa Brudos was a toddler, thus demanding more physical attention and nurturing from her mother, and as such, Ralphine had begun to refuse to participate in the nude household, high heel modelling, photography, and sexual rituals should her daughter be...
Seems reasonable enough.
And it is a reasonable request that you don't treat me like a French maid while the kid's watching.
Absolutely.
Furthermore, Jerome had begun putting on weight, and his wife would later state that although she never informed her husband of this, his physical appearance had begun to repel her. As such, although Ralphine remained loyal to her husband, the two engaged in sex much less frequently, with his wife devoting more of her time to her daughter and social activities with female friends, and Jerome spending increasing amounts of time either working about the house or in his garage workshop, devoting focus upon various electronics projects. In May 1967, as his wife was in hospital giving birth to Brian, Jerome discreetly followed a young woman wearing attractive high-heeled shoes to her home, and he waited until nightfall before entering her apartment, whereupon he proceeded to choke her into unconsciousness.
This is while his wife's giving birth.
Yes, literally. Jerome would later state his intentions upon entering the household did not initially include rape, but the sight of a young and attractive woman lying limp and at his mercy aroused him to such a degree that he did rape her unconscious body before fleeing from her apartment with her shoes. The following year,
So another
Brudos,
escalation, because this is the first time he's done that, isn't it?
this is the first rape.
Yeah.
The following year, Brudos was arrested by Corvallis police while on the grounds of an Oregon State University women's dormitory. He was charged with stealing women's clothing and was wearing pedal pushers, high-heeled shoes, and women's underwear at the time of his arrest.
Oh no, pedal pushers are short trousers, aren't they?
Yeah, they're usually quite skin tight. They come down to like just above the calf.
Yeah.
And they look great on girls, not so much on...
I can't imagine they look particularly great on him.
Obese, middle-aged Jerome.
No.
Although, you know, someone for everyone. Between 1968 and 1969, Brudos abducted and strangled 4 young women and attempted to abduct a minimum of 2 others. 3 of these victims were murdered in the basement or garage workshop of Brudos's home and 1 inside his vehicle.
So he's now lost the fight with his demons then?
He's gone full mental.
Yeah.
All of his victims were abducted and murdered in order to satisfy his need to both dominate and possess attractive young women and to satiate his sexual fetishes. Following the act of murder, each victim was subjected to a ritual of dressing in differing lingerie and footwear, during which Brudos would arrange her body in suggestive and provocative positions prior to photographing her body and engaging in masturbation, or often while staring at and or caressing the victim's feet and ankles after dressing the body in differing lingerie and footwear.
So once he let the demon out the box, the demon went mad.
Oh, the demon took control. He wasn't always happy with just taking photos and posing them. Each victim was also subjected to acts of necrophilia, and 3 of them were mutilated after death, with Brudos retaining the severed body parts to fuel his fetishes, in addition to expressing his dominance. All were disposed of in the Willamette River, although their shoes and underwear were retained and stowed within the household garage, which Brudos's wife and children were forbidden from entering without first announcing their intention via an intercom that he'd had installed.
Right.
Not suspicious at all.
No.
No red flags being raised there.
Wouldn't bat an eyelid.
Right, you're not to go in my garage unless you check on the intercom first at the door.
He's obviously not read. Is it Bluebeard's Treasure or something like that? The old story about the beautiful young girl who marries the man, lives in his castle, and she's allowed to go anywhere in the castle except the one room. And of course, it's an old Gothic horror story, and the temptation gets the better of her, and she steals the key and she goes into the room. And the original book isn't particularly graphic about what happens to her in the room, but she never re-emerges.
They never do. I mean, there's a reason there's a lock on that door.
Yes. And there's a reason you've been told to stay out.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the victims. Linda Catherine Slauson, she was a 19-year-old door-to-door encyclopedia salesgirl from Aloha in Oregon, whom Brudos... Sorry?
Door-to-door encyclopedia salesman. I always thought that was just...
No, that actually happened. We had them...
thing, you know?
We had them in the UK. They were selling the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah, I suppose so.
I remember them coming round to my house.
Oh, okay. Sure, Mark would point out to you now that you clearly didn't buy any.
Absolutely, yeah. Anyway, Brudos encountered Linda as he worked in his yard on January 26, 1968, and she inadvertently entered his property, having confused his address with a neighbour's on the belief that she had an appointment to potentially sell an encyclopedia.
God, that's rubbish. That's very unfortunate.
That's bad karma. Upon hearing the reason for Slauson's visit, Brudos feigned interest in purchasing an entire set of encyclopedias to lure her to the basement of his home. As Slauson sat on a stool and began advocating the sale of her encyclopedias, Brudos bludgeoned her about the head with a piece of wood, then manually strangled her to death before concealing her body beneath the staircase to the basement. He then asked his mother to take his daughter from the house to purchase hamburgers in order that he could engage in necrophilia with Slauson's body.
Jesus, his mother's still on the scene.
And his daughter was in the house while he was killing this girl.
All right, yeah, he's lost it completely now, hasn't he?
Upon undressing the young woman's body, he discovered that Slauson was wearing attractive red lingerie. This inspired him to retrieve a box of women's underwear and footwear that he'd accumulated, typically via theft, and repeatedly dress and undress her body in differing footwear and lingerie, in addition to engaging in repeated acts of necrophilia, photographing much of this process. Hours later, he severed Linda's left foot from her body with a hacksaw. He retained this severed appendage in the rear of the family freezer, located also in the basement,
Okay.
with a view to both future usage of his modelling and his collection of high-heeled shoes, and to fuel his masturbatory fantasies. He also retained the two encyclopedias that Slauson had hoped to sell him.
No, that's just mean.
I mean, that's just theft.
But so he's keeping a foot now. So he can take it out of the freezer and pop it into different shoes whenever he feels the need.
Yeah. And then pull the pud over it.
No more semblance of sanity here then.
He later bound the remainder of Slauson's body to a heavy cylinder head and discarded her body over a rail somewhere in Marion County, adding that he could not recall the precise location. The second victim was Jan Susan Whitney, and he encountered Whitney, who was just a 23-year-old motorist, as he drove home from a job in Lebanon, not Lebanon as we know it, but I'm thinking Lebanon, Oregon, on November the 26th in 1968. And he later insisted that this murder, much like Linda Slauson's, was a crime of opportunity. He had simply encountered Whitney as she drove home from work and observed three individuals standing beside a broken down rambler along Interstate 5 between Salem and Albany. After inspecting Whitney's car, Brudos claimed he could fix it, but he would need to drive her to his house to collect the necessary tools. Whitney and her traveling companions, who were actually hitchhikers that she'd previously picked up, agreed to accompany him upon the promise that the two hitchhikers would first be driven to their intended destination. So they entered the rear of Brudos's vehicle and Whitney the passenger seat. After driving the two hitchhikers to their destination, Brudos continued with Whitney to his house, which he then entered while remaining parked in the driveway, ostensibly to retrieve the necessary tools to repair Whitney's car. He then discreetly entered the rear of the vehicle as Whitney remained seated in the passenger seat. He then asked her to close her eyes and describe how to tie a shoelace without opening her eyes or moving her hands.
Right, okay.
Whitney agreed to this challenge for some reason.
Yeah.
And Jerome then strangled her from behind with a leather luggage strap before raping her body inside the vehicle. He then carried her body into the garage workshop where he dressed her again in differing footwear and lingerie before repeatedly engaging in acts of necrophilia with her corpse. Whitney's body was left hoisted from the pulley in the workshop ceiling for 2 days, with Jerome later admitting to violating her body whenever he felt the need. Her body was also dressed in differing lingerie and repeatedly photographed. He then severed one...
The photography thing now, though, he must have a dark room.
I would imagine so. Or an instant camera.
Well, yeah, I suppose, yeah.
But then I would wonder who's pressing the button.
Yeah. Well, presumably himself, but...
Yeah, but then he can't engage. I mean, these people like to see themselves in action as well.
Yeah, this
generally.
is true. Yeah.
So he severed one of her breasts with a view to using it as a paperweight, although this idea was abandoned when he noted that the epoxy hardener failed to fully set. He instead stuffed the breast with sawdust before pinning the breast to a wooden board.
Okay.
Now, according to Brudos, 2 days after Whitney's murder, a car crashed into his garage, knocking a hole in the wall. A responding policeman had looked into the resultant damage, but due to the dust, debris and darkness, and the fact that the hole was at ground level, he failed to observe Whitney's mutilated and suspended body. So that evening, her body was tethered to a section of scrap railroad iron and thrown into the Willamette River, along with Slauson's severed foot, which by this stage had begun to decompose.
I can imagine, yeah. Polaroid cameras, the patent was 1939. They were available readily from 1948 onwards.
Wow. But probably only in America.
Yes, and I imagine very, very expensive at the time, but...
So we come to Karen Elena Sprinker, and she was an 18-year-old Oregon State University chemistry student. She was abducted at gunpoint from a parking lot outside a department store while en route to meet her mother for lunch on March 27th, 1969. Brudos, dressed in women's clothing at the time of the abduction, had impulsively, I don't see how it's impulsively if he's actually got dressed for the occasion.
Yeah, there's no impulsive there, is there?
But he'd impulsively driven his station wagon into the parking lot after observing a young woman wearing high-heeled shoes and a miniskirt at this location. Having parked his car and attempted to chase the individual, he soon lost sight of her. En route back to his vehicle, he observed Sprinker exiting her car and walking towards the department store. She was forced at gunpoint to enter his vehicle and accompany him to his home, with Brudos promising not to harm her. Now, according to Jerome, Sprinker repeatedly pleaded with him not to hurt her, adding that once taken inside his workshop, she stated that she would do anything he wanted, provided he didn't kill her.
Oh, yeah, imagine she's shitting herself and prepared to say anything.
Yeah.
At this point, begging. God alive.
In response, Jerome asked if she was a virgin.
Now, that's a trick question.
Yeah, she replied that she was, adding that she was also on her period. He then forced her to undress before proceeding to rape her on the workshop floor. Sprinker was then forced to pose in differing high-heeled shoes and underwear as Brudos photographed her. He then bound her hands behind her back before placing a rope around her neck. He asked if the rope was too tight. She replied that it was. In response, he threw the end of the rope over a ceiling beam and pulled, causing Sprinker to be winched from the ground, whereupon she kicked a little and died. Over the following hours, Jerome repeatedly engaged in acts of necrophilia with Sprinker's body. He also severed her breasts so he could form plastic molds with the organs.
Oh, God.
That evening, Sprinker's body was lashed to a 6-cylinder engine component and thrown again into the Willamette River.
Yeah, it started off amusing, but this guy's completely and utterly lost the plot, hasn't he?
Yeah, the merriment and the giggling soon succumbed to the horrible reality of what this guy was actually capable of.
Can you imagine what those poor girls must have gone through?
There were some lucky ones.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that somebody got away.
In April 1969, he attempted to abduct 2 young women on consecutive days. Both escaped and reported their ordeal to the authorities. The first of them was a 24-year-old motorist, Sharon Wood, and she encountered Brudos in the basement stairwell of a parking garage in Portland on the 21st of April. Wood later recalled feeling a tapping motion on her shoulder, only to turn around to observe Brudos pointing a pistol at her face and ordering her not to scream. Although he attempted to restrain her with an arm lock, she fiercely fought her assailant by both biting and kicking him and twisting her wrist as she attempted to divert the pistol muzzle away from herself and towards her attacker, while simultaneously biting deeply into his hand, causing him to slam her head into the concrete floor before fleeing the scene. Well done, you.
Yeah, absolutely.
The following day, a 15-year-old schoolgirl, Gloria Smith, was forced at gunpoint to accompany Brudos to a green Volkswagen Carmen Ghia, with Brudos informing her, "I want you to come with me. I won't hurt you. I won't rape you." Never believe that.
No.
If they say they're not going to do something specific to you, that is exactly what they are going to do to you.
Fuck yes.
He then grabbed the rear of her coat and forced her to accompany him, but agreed to the child's request, because she was a child, to let go of her coat as she walked alongside him. When she observed a woman working on her front lawn, she yelled and ran towards the woman, causing Brudos again to flee from the scene. She described her abductor as being in his early 30s, approximately 6 foot or 1.83 meters, weighing about 200 pounds and wearing dark glasses. All known sex offenders matching this description were investigated but eliminated as suspects.
Was he not known then?
Apparently not. I'm guessing that when he was initially arrested, he hadn't been married and put on a load of weight.
Mm.
So we come to Linda Dawn Sully. Sully was a 22-year-old removal firm secretary and part-time Portland State University student from Beaverton in Oregon. And when she was abducted from the grounds of the Lloyd Center shopping mall late in the afternoon of April 23rd, 1969, she had just purchased a pair of slacks and a watch band as birthday gifts for her fiancé and was returning to her vehicle when she was approached by Brudos, who deceived her into believing he was a policeman by displaying a fake badge and informed her that she was being arrested for shoplifting. Although she protested her innocence, she agreed to accompany him to his vehicle, where she was informed she was then being kidnapped for ransom. He then drove toward his home, parked inside his garage, and ordered Sally to follow him across the yard to his house, believing his wife and children to be with relatives. At this very moment, though, his wife appeared on the porch to inform him she had prepared the family dinner. In response, Brudos, over 10 feet away from the porch, signaled to Sally to stand still. He informed his wife he would be in the house in a few moments. He then returned Sally to the garage, where she was bound with cord. Brudos then entered the house alone to eat with his family.
So the wife presumably didn't see this girl then, I didn't realise.
Clearly not, or she thought nothing of it. I'm a bit of a loss. Upon returning to the garage, Brudos discovered that Linda Sully had freed herself from her bindings, but had made no further efforts to escape. She attempted to resist his immediate efforts to place a leather strap around her neck and pull her off her feet, asking the question, "Why are you doing this to me?" She then began to scratch and kick Brudos as he lifted her from the ground by the leather strap, although she soon became unconscious. Brudos then proceeded to strangle Linda Sully to death as he raped her. Her body was then hung by the neck upon the same workshop pulley that he had hung his previous two victims. He then placed a hypodermic needle into her rib cage beneath each armpit, through which he ran an electrical current in an effort to reanimate her body.
I wasn't expecting that. That's kind of gone left field big time, isn't it?
Disappointed that the experiment failed to produce dancing or seizure-like symptoms, but simply singed her flesh at the point of entry, Brudos rapidly abandoned this experiment.
So he's just trying to make them twitch.
Yeah.
You're not actually trying to reanimate them. He just wants to...
He wants... Twitch. You know what it's for.
Yeah. Ugh. Ugh.
He retained her body for 24 hours, engaging in necrophilia on at least one occasion, before binding her body to a vehicle gearbox and discarding her in the Willamette River. Never go swimming in the Willamette.
No.
Unless you're looking for car parts.
Yeah, well, indeed. Now, there's an entire car there now.
Now, although Brudos created a mould of Sally's breasts, he did not mutilate this section of her body as he had with previous victims, as he believed that her nipples were too pink.
All right. See, that detail, I mean, presumably that would have been while he was being investigated or, giving a statement to the police. But what a weird detail.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I'm miles away. I'm reading ahead like, we'll edit this out.
Well, that's why I kept quiet.
On May the 10th in 1969, two fishermen discovered what they believed to be a large parcel floating beneath the surface of the water in a shallow section of the Long Tom River. Upon closer inspection, they discovered the parcel was actually the bound, bloated body of a young woman clad in a coat, weighed down by a large gearbox with copper wiring twisted in a manner in which electricians trim electrical lines. Now, the body was identified as that of Linda Sally, and due to the extent of decomposition, a subsequent autopsy was unable to determine whether or not she had been raped, although the coroner did rule her death as being due to strangulation. In addition, her autopsy revealed the needle marks encircled by burning on each side of her rib cage close to her armpits, which had evidently been inflicted after death. 2 days later, an underwater search and recovery unit discovered the body of Karen Sprinker, approximately 20 yards from where Sally's body had been found. Her body was similarly weighted to the riverbed, in this case by the 6-cylinder head, and she had been bound in precisely the same manner with the same cord and copper wire as Linda Sally had been.
Clearly has a favourite dumping spot then.
Yeah. Now, her autopsy determined that she had either died of smothering or strangulation, and both her breasts had been removed from her body after death. Although Sprinker was discovered wearing the same green skirt and sweater that she had worn on the day of her disappearance, the size 38D bra upon her body was many sizes too large for her and had been stuffed with brown paper toweling in an apparent effort to simulate a much larger breast size. The most predominant factors in linking the deaths of Saley and Sprinker to the same perpetrator were the facts that both young women had been bound with the same electrical flex. They'd both been weighed down with car components, suggesting that the murderer may have been an electrician or mechanic. And in an effort to trace the origin of the auto components, several officers questioned employees and proprietors of all garages and junkyards in Western Oregon. Upon formally identifying both of the women, investigators also began questioning their family members and acquaintances. Now, police questioning of Sprinker's fellow students at Oregon State revealed several female students had received phone calls in recent months from a man claiming to be a Vietnam vet who had asked to take them on dates. This man had used various aliases, and almost all of the girls had either refused or simply hung up the phone. However, one had recently taken a degree of pity on them and allowed the man to take her on a date. And she described this, I know, it's a mad.
Yeah.
She described this man.
She didn't get a talking to from her father before she went to college, did she?
Hi, I'm a complete stranger on the phone. Fancy a date? Yeah, why not?
God.
She described the man as being Caucasian, in his late 20s, early 30s, slightly overweight, with thinning blondish red, ginger.
Mm-hmm.
Strawberry blonde? I think not.
Oh, yeah.
Blondish red hair and freckles, that's it. I mean, his vehicle had been a dirty station wagon with kids' clothes in it, leading her to believe that he had actually been married. The date itself had been a largely unpleasant experience, and Brudos, for it was our Brudos, had sensed the student's increasing unease in his presence, at one point indicating that she had reason to be wary by stating, "Think of those 2 girls who were found in the river." Upon driving her home at the end of the date...
She didn't leg it. I mean...
I know, she got in the car also.
Bloody hell.
On driving her home, he asked her why she had changed her mind and agreed to accompany him, to which she replied she'd been curious. According to the student, Brudos replied, "How did you know I wouldn't take you to the river and strangle you?" Now, despite her desire not to accompany...
We don't know her reply to that then.
The reply is not here.
Yeah.
But she desired not to repeat the date, but she hadn't outwardly told him of this intention, and investigators asked her to contact them if this man ever again called to ask her out, and she agreed. Now, a week after the discovery of Linda Sully's body on May the 18th, Brudos again contacted this woman and was arrested as he walked towards the agreed rendezvous that evening. He provided police with his correct name, age and occupation, but gave a false address. And with no legal basis to detain him, he was soon released from custody, although a background check revealed his history of physical and sexual violence towards women, and a search of a police vehicle database revealed he had resided in the district of Portland, where Linda Slauson had last been seen alive, and upon discovering Brudos's actual address, investigators discovered that he currently resided just blocks from the department store where Karen Sprinker had been abducted. Furthermore, although he didn't drive a Volkswagen Carmen Ghia, they discovered that his mother owned such a vehicle and that he had been in possession of the car on April the 22nd, which was the date of the attempted abduction of Gloria Smith, who herself positively identified Jerome as the man who had attempted to abduct her. And this information was deemed sufficient to obtain a search warrant of Jerome's property.
Good.
So 8 days after his initial arrest, his property was searched, and stowed within his garage, authorities discovered a large cache of women's lingerie and footwear, a list of phone numbers of sorority houses and college girls' living quarters, and numerous Polaroid photographs of young women, some alive, some obviously deceased. Almost all the photographs had been taken within the garage, including several depicting a deceased woman hanging from the pulley with a mirror laid horizontally on the floor directly beneath her feet. In one image, the reflection within the mirror depicted Brudos holding his Polaroid, indicating that he had indeed taken that photo. One of the individuals depicted in these photographs was rapidly identified as Karen Sprinker. She was depicted standing nude, save for high-heeled slippers, with an expression of basic fear, contemplation, and or apparent resignation on her face. A severed female breast coated with epoxy was also discovered on a mantle in the living room.
What? Is he still married? Is his wife and kids still
in the living room? If my wife put an epoxy-covered penis on the mantelpiece, I would have questions.
Yes, many questions.
Firstly, I would check my own underwears to make sure I wasn't missing anything. Police also discovered a coil of copper wiring determined to be of precisely the same type used to bind the bodies of the two girls in the river. One length of rope confiscated by investigators was tied in precisely the same manner used to bind the victims' bodies. In addition, numerous engine components were scattered and stowed around the garage. And these discoveries were also deemed sufficient to place Brudos under constant surveillance. I would have said a little bit more than that, mate.
What? They didn't.
You've got photographs.
Yeah.
They've got photographs of him with dead bodies.
No, that's just mind-boggling.
Oregon police.
How much evidence do you need?
Seriously.
Fucking hell.
So now, by May the 29th, so 3 days later, they figured they had amassed enough evidence relating to the attempted abduction of Gloria Smith to arrest Brudos for this offence as inquiries into the murders continued. He was discovered by highway patrol officers hiding beneath a blanket in the rear of the family station wagon as his wife drove the vehicle towards Portland. Now, I would be arresting her at this stage.
Yeah. She must know something's going on. Jesus Christ, she's got to know something's going on.
I mean, we were suspicious when she didn't notice the clearly kidnapped girl being dragged into the house.
Yes.
The following evening, Brudos placed a phone call to his wife, asking her to destroy further incriminating evidence, although his wife did refuse to do this.
Okay.
Following this second arrest, he was extensively questioned with regards to developments pertaining to the discoveries within his garage and his connection with regards to the missing and murdered young women, 3 of whom investigators had positively identified as Whitney, Sprinker, and Sally. He initially denied involvement in any of the cases, dismissing the evidence as circumstantial. Before, after several days, gradually divulging his erotic fetishes and outlining how deeply ingrained they had become within his psyche and subsequently severely impacting his daily life.
Yes, but it has to be said, severely impacting other people's daily lives far more than his own.
And severely ending some of them.
Absolutely, yes.
By early June, he'd provided investigators with a full confession to all murders, all 4 of them, which he subsequently outlined for the police and later psychologists. He began by outlining the opportunistic murder of Linda Slauson, whose name he was unable to recollect, which had not been linked to him and which he admitted had been instigated largely because of the high-heeled shoes that she had been wearing when she'd accidentally entered his property. Although he acknowledged ultimate responsibility for his crimes, he remained somewhat resistant when questioned with regards to aspects of reasoning and premeditation, simply stating at one stage, "There must be something wrong with me." Yeah, really.
Yeah.
He denied harboring a hatred of women, but he admitted the act of killing enabled him to let off steam. The psychiatrists who examined him concluded he was unable to achieve satisfaction from normal intercourse and that the overriding motive behind his crimes was lust, adding that even in cases where Brudos had killed women he had encountered in moments of opportunism, he had known that he would ultimately murder his victim. Photographs, yeah.
At this point, did they take him out the back of the police station and put a bullet in his head?
That would have been the right timeline for that sort of thing to happen, but it didn't happen in this particular case. Photographs that he'd taken of 2 of his victims were conclusively matched to the victims discovered in the Long Tom River, and his description of Whitney and her abduction matched sufficiently the circumstances surrounding her abduction to identify her as his second murder victim. Although Slauson initially remained known as a Jane Doe, he was appointed an attorney named Dale Drake, and an arraignment hearing was scheduled for June the 4th, 1969. He was formally charged on the 4th of June with the murders of Whitney, Sprinker and Sally.
That was my 4th birthday.
Oh, well, happy birthday in retrospect, I suppose.
Yeah.
In response to an entered plea of not guilty by reason of insanity at his initial arraignment, he was then subjected to a battery of psychiatric examinations by several doctors who unanimously concluded that he was indeed sane and competent to stand trial. And as such, his trial was to be held on June the 30th. On June 27th, 3 days before the trial, he formally entered a plea of guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder before Marion County Court Circuit Judge Valdez Sloper, and he was sentenced to 3 consecutive terms of life imprisonment with the possibility of parole to be served in Oregon State Penitentiary.
No parole.
3 consecutive terms, not concurrent. It's life followed by life, followed by life.
So you could get parole once he's dead, then?
You could get parole after the first 212 years, maybe.
I don't see the point, though, in why did they even bother tacking on the with the possibility of parole?
I think
it's the purpose of adding that.
I think that's how the judge gets his jollies.
Yeah, possibly.
Then I threw him a lifeline.
Yeah.
He repeatedly appealed these convictions, although every appeal was unsuccessful. And despite his wife's insistence that she knew nothing about any of his crimes, and his insistence that he had forced her to drive the family station wagon from their home on the day of his arrest, as he hid him in the back of the vehicle, on August 7th, 1969, Ralphine Brudos was formally indicted for the first-degree murder of Karen Sprinker. And these charges, these charges were initially filed in relation to an eyewitness account from an individual who claimed to have seen Brudos's wife assisting him in forcing a blanket-covered young woman into their property on the date of her disappearance. Now, Ralphine's denied all knowledge of the crime, and the eyewitness's account was refuted by other witnesses at her September 1969 trial, and she was finally acquitted of all charges the following month. I'm not so sure.
No. It sounds to me that she was certainly aware, either in terror and was letting him get on with it in the hope that it wouldn't extend to her and possibly the children, or she was a willing accomplice.
Yeah, she sounds guilty as fuck to me. I would definitely fancy her for a convict. In the years following his incarceration, he became a model prisoner, assigned clerical duties by the 1970s. He later utilised his electronic skills to maintain the prison's computer record system and install a cable television network, in addition to being entrusted with stocking, repairing, and maintaining the prison vending machines. As a convicted sex offender, he was known to have endured several physical assaults by fellow inmates, although in each instance he refused to name his assailants. He was permitted to order mail order catalogues depicting women modelling high-heeled shoes and underwear.
What?
And he used this material to fuel his erotic and masturbatory fantasies.
In prison, he's allowed to do that.
Yeah. I'm not happy about that particular.
No. No.
For your average prisoner, I don't begrudge him a wank mag.
No.
But this is fuel for a fire.
Yeah. Plus the fact he's had to be punished, not pandered.
Yeah. So he attended numerous parole hearings throughout his confinement, although family members of his victims repeatedly attended these parole hearings in which they requested that he remained incarcerated for the duration of his life.
Parole hearing?
I think you're entitled to go to a hearing after a set amount of time, but there's absolutely, unless you've shown remorse, admitted guilt, and relatives are happy to say, we've found forgiveness, you can forget it, basically.
As I say that, I still find 3 life sentences. But
bear in mind this was like 1969. We're now nearly 30 years later at 1995.
Right.
And he was informed on June 21st, 1995, that no matter how many more appeals he might want to push, he would spend the remainder of his life in prison.
Good.
Although he continued to attend parole hearings every 2 years for the remainder of his life. You'll be pleased to hear he's no longer alive.
Good. When did he die?
I will tell you that. But while incarcerated, he granted several interviews to numerous individuals of varying professions. One of those individuals was a former Marion County detective named Jim Burns, who later recollected a conversation between himself and Jerome regarding compassion and remorse, in which he asked the question, "Do you feel some remorse, Jerry? Do you feel sorry for your victims, for the girls who died?" And in response, Brudos picked up a section of paper from the table between the two. He crunched the paper into a ball and then threw it on the floor, replying, "That much. I care about those girls as much as I care about that piece of paper."
No remorse then, clearly.
None.
No.
He died of liver cancer, which I'm pleased to be able to inform you is particularly painful.
Good.
Whilst incarcerated within the penitentiary at 5:10 a.m. on March 28th, 2006. At the time of his death, he was 67 years old and the longest incarcerated inmate at the Oregon Department of Corrections, having served a total of almost 37 years.
Well, good.
Upon receipt of news of his death, the younger sister of Jan Whitney informed a reporter, "As soon as I heard he was dead, I started crying, and it wasn't for him, it was for our family. He put our family through hell. You were never really the same." And this sentiment was echoed by one of the detectives assigned to the case, James Stovall, who stated, "I'm satisfied he's died. It's just good riddance. He was a true fucking monster."
Because this is something that, true crime, whether it be podcast on TV, it's not often stressed or mentioned that, you have victims, but there's victims' families. And their entire lives are destroyed as well by this shit. You don't shrug that kind of thing off and then go, "Oh, well, we'll just get on with it now." I mean, every single victim's family is just ruined.
Yeah. I mean, and these were particularly fucking awful murders.
Oh, God, yeah. Vile human being. But then also, you see, I don't know when she died, but I mean, I know that the law can't go around his mother's house and blame it on her, but it clearly didn't help, did it?
No.
Yeah, no, she sowed the seeds for all of this. And I think it's...
Yeah, but I mean, then you're going back to the nature or nurture arguments.
Absolutely, but it does highlight, when, I don't know, there was some case of rape in America, and I remember seeing an interview with a woman, and she's saying, look, the only people who stop rapists in America are boys' mothers. You need to teach your children your boys to have more respect for women. You need to think how you raise your boys, because obviously a lot of this starts in early life.
But then you could also argue that the boy's father needs to set an example of how to treat the boy's mother.
Well, this is also very, very true. Oh, God, yeah. Yeah, no, there's no denying that as well. I mean, awful lot of the...
It's just a vicious circle,
yeah.
Unless both parents are equally responsible and affectionate towards each other, you've got a dysfunctional family.
But then, as you say, an old mate of mine, I remember he came into the bar one night, needed to get drunk. So I got him drunk, and over the course of discussion, it turned out he'd spent the day in the Old Bailey. His youngest son had just been sent down for 18 years for armed robbery. And he was just in bits because he said, I don't know where we went wrong. Me and the wife, the other three kids, they're all professionals. They've done really well for themselves. He said he was a little scallywag as a kid. He said as a teenager, he just informed me he'd rather rob banks than get a real job.
I mean, it's a legitimate career, or it was.
But, clearly it's something that was just in that lad. He liked the lifestyle. I don't think it was, it wasn't caused by bad upbringing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, that brings us to the end of this Murdery Bits episode, which was a bit of a long one. I'm sorry about that, but it had to be said. And this episode is actually not just for our Patreons. I'm going to make this available to everybody who wants to view it on our Patreon site. So you don't actually need to be a Patreon to see this one, but it will give you an idea of the sort of stuff we talk about. And if you like it, and I say that in the loosest possible sense, I can't even say if you enjoyed it. There's no words.
No.
So how do we say this? If you could face hearing more similar stories or similar atrocities, if you have a purely innocent interest in this kind of thing, then you could become one of our Patreons and listen to us prattle on about this sort of stuff every week. Oh, anyway, in the meantime, don't forget we've got our regular podcasts every week at Strange Stuff Podcast, and we'll be doing so many more of these. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.
See you later, folks.
And we're